Someone had a question right from the beginning, so we will start with this gentleman. Please raise your hand. We have 3 roaming microphones. Please wait for the microphone. I thank the speakers for their very interesting presentations. I have a question regarding therapy. We have experienced 20 years of failure in gene therapy of neurodegenerative diseases. Well, I'm exaggerating, but successes were few and far apart, except for a few diseases. Huntington's disease is a very good example, which was considered to be the one that could be treated with gene therapy. But adenovirus with wild type genes were a failure. But more recently, a biotech company showed that by performing gene therapy with adenoviruses without the wild type gene, but rather containing an RNA population called microRNA, regulator RNA, we achieved some very promising results. In Parkinson's disease, one, are there any trials looking into the role of microRNA? And two, are there any trials that are thinking of using microRNAs for a therapeutic solution? Maybe I will answer by saying that there are studies on trials with microRNAs in Parkinson's disease. We supported one project at the Institut du Cerveau a few years ago, and then I'll allow the researchers to answer. Sébastien Cancela, Dr. Rabassa, the Institut du Cerveau, the Brain Institute, they both worked on microRNAs. Please, you answer before I say anything stupid. At the Brain Institute, we work on another form of microRNA, of RNAs. Long RNAs, very different. For microRNAs, a lot has been done for all kinds of neurodegenerative diseases and other brain conditions and situations in which there are dysregulations taking place. I wasn't aware of this trial that you just referred to, but the idea is the following. Those molecules can regulate gene expression, and technically they could correct, I guess, the defects that are found in the disease. It's a new approach. It's been around for quite some time. We are working on microRNAs for many neurodegenerative diseases. It's an expanding field of research. But again, I know long RNAs better than microRNAs. Well, generally speaking, because maybe this is not very clear for everybody, there is a new therapeutic area being studied, but not just Huntington's disease, SLA, Huntington's disease, not only microRNAs, but interference RNAs, other RNAs. The idea is when in the disease, one molecule is being overexpressed, we will stop its expression. And then in other diseases where a molecule is missing, we will try to restore the expression. It's been done for myopathies. It's been done for some very serious diseases, infantile spinal amyotrophy, children who die within 1 year, and the new therapeutic solution can be applied when the child is very, very young, and screening must happen at birth, but there is a solution. So there is a lot of work being done in neurosciences on RNAs. It's very promising, and there are trials on multi-systematized atrophy. There is work in progress with intrathecal injections of RNAs that modulate the expression of a protein, in this case, fascinuclein. Okay, another question here in the front row. Thank you. As you said, no stupid questions. I have two questions. May I ask? Well, ask one first. On the experience on rats and addiction, why did you not come up with a protocol in which rats have no interaction? Well, we perform conventional tests in conditions where they have no interactions. That's the gold standard, that's the reference. We always do that. We test them in situations with no interaction. And for the last manipulation I showed you, because they push the lever to open the door, experiments have been conducted where behind the door, rather than placing a rat, we place an object to see whether the rats were as interested in an object as in a cage mate. So I'm not revealing anything new. Obviously, the rats are not so interested because an unmoving object is definitely going to make them feel curious the first time, but not the second time. Very quickly, they'll lose interest. One more question, and then we will have a look at the questions online. I think alpha-synucleic acid was mentioned for dopaminergic neuron degeneration, and I heard you talk about mitochondria degeneration. Does it mean the target has changed? I'm sorry, I don't. Okay. Mitochondria are elements contained within the cells. If you take a cell and you consider it's as like a small town, and the mitochondria will be the factory where they produce energy. And all the cells have this kind of little factory inside. And mitochondria do not necessarily degenerate, but sometimes they may work in a less efficient way in the neurons. And when all the cells are affected, like in Parkinson's disease, we believe that in dopaminergic neurons, mostly, the protection mechanisms that have been implemented to counteract the mitochondria degeneration are not quite as efficient. And that's why dopaminergic neurons die. So we believe that the protective responses related to mitochondria dysfunctioning are not functioning well in the dopaminergic neurons. Have I been clear? Well, we're talking about something that happens within the cell and not a different cell. Mitochondria can be found in any cells. I'd like to answer a few questions online because we have quite a few. There is a question for Dr. Cheval, a more technical question. How long can we keep organoids in culture? Very good question. Almost as long as you wish. All the PhD students in the room will shed a tear. No, we seriously, we keep them for 2, 3, maybe 5, 6 months. We cultivate them and we collect them after a couple of months, sometimes 5, 6, depending on the biological issue that we're working on. In the project that I showed you at the end of my presentation, we assemble them, we make assembloids, and we allow the connections to happen between the various areas. And it's Pauline Lachal's project. She looks after 3 months and then after 6 months. And I think she even went further than that. And just to take time in consideration, How long does it take to obtain an organoid? When you start cultivating the very first cells, how long does it take to obtain an organoid? Well, I think we can start talking about an organoid after a few weeks, but it's a very immature organoid. Then it will continue growing, developing. I mean, we want to mimic embryonic development, basically. And then we increase the maturation with time. And in order to obtain mature dopaminergic neurons, projections that work, it takes longer. We wait longer. But that is because we want to obtain organoids. Then there are the experiments we're going to conduct on the organoids once we have obtained them. And that takes time. So one single experiment could last maybe 9 months, 12 months altogether. I have a question online on pain. Another question online. A question on pain. Serotonin receptor inhibition in the spinal cord, could that induce secondary undesired effects in man? Of course. Of course. The preclinical research results do not let us believe there will be in the near future a therapy based on the antagonists. Serotonin also has an impact on the motor area. There are receptors that play a role in the motor control, but we have ideas that we could look into to understand how we could maybe come up with a better treatment in the near future or in the future. But obviously, we still need to go over a certain threshold. If you'll allow me, I'd like to push the question further. You talked about molecules that have been tested on their own and also in combination. Can we imagine that by combining them, maybe we could apply a lower dose? And by applying a lower dose, we could limit the undesired effects. Well, of course, we can work on lower doses, decrease the doses, but we can also develop new molecules which possibly might target more specifically those two receptors only. But again, that means we have to perform biochemical research, biology research, but we have new avenues we need to explore. Right now, we have this result. For what it's worth, it has shown that he can improve pain-related syndrome. There are also thermal response issues that I have not had time to mention. It's promising, but we're still in the preclinical phases, and we need to still develop the hypothesis to have a more specific treatment for man. One more question in the audience. Hello, I had a question regarding agonists and unwanted effects. Have you used in this study the mode of administration, oral administration or pump administration? In this study that I mentioned, we did not use oral administration. Well, we did a test that I have not mentioned because we wanted to compare, I mean, we compared attraction for glucose, and we compared the glucose and the agonist. There seems to be no preference for agonists, but that's the oral administration. In the study, we did not perform oral administration. We gave the animals a chronic therapy, one dose daily, which is close to what happens in patients who take the medication orally, but we did not use pumps, if that's your question. Some unwanted effects are not quite so present if we use the pump rather than the oral administration. Apomorphine is the molecule because it's a continuous administration with a pump. And the more continuous the administration, the lower the stress, and therefore the lower the unwanted effects. Maybe a patch would give a continuous release that would be better than oral administration with immediate release. But it's pharmacokinetics here, and the way the administration can play a role. We tried to put ourselves in the situation that was as close as possible to the study I showed you that showed 50% after 5 years of treatment. Another question from the audience. Thank you for the presentation. Please put the microphone close to your mouth. Can you hear me? Not so well. Okay, okay. I have a question, basic question, not very technical. I'm wondering, knowing the adverse events is not recent. I mean, we've known about them for a while. So why, when a doctor prescribes the treatment, are we not warned against unwanted adverse events? I am playing an active role in my therapy, and if you explain to me that there are unwanted effects, and maybe I will act accordingly. And the underlying question is, if I don't take the therapy that will act on my symptoms, does it mean that the disease will evolve more quickly, or will it still evolve at the same pace? So are we talking, on one hand, the symptoms are not present, and on the other hand, does it have an impact on the speed at which the disease will evolve? Because we have to be active players in our therapy. Absolutely, you are actively taking part in your therapy. I mean, this is the kind of conversation we have all the time with our patients when we introduce the treatment and during the follow-up. But there are several questions here. First question, is the therapy playing a role in the speed of evolution of the disease? Well, the therapy improves the symptoms, but it doesn't change the course of the disease. And that's why we continue to research. And in my clinical center where I work, we have conducted many trials on neuroprotector therapies, a different approach from the one I introduced today. And the therapies we offer nowadays, what you can buy in nowadays is something that will treat the symptoms and not change the course of the disease. There's only one for which there was one trial showing that maybe it plays a small role in the evolution of the disease, but not enough for us to stop research. And so taking those drugs is mostly to improve your life, your quality of life. And if you, I can show you pictures who were taking earlier in the century, when before those drugs were discovered, when people would, the Parkinsonian patients would be hospitalized in psychiatric wards, they were in a very poor condition, and not taking the medication, relieving the symptoms was very bad for their quality of life. Second question, unwanted adverse events. I always explain to my patients that a drug that does not have any adverse events is possibly not working, not doing anything. Because whatever you take, cannabis, a drug, a chewing gum, whatever you take, you you put something in your body, and there will be wanted and unwanted effects. The wanted effect is the therapeutic effect. The unwanted effect is bad. If you eat too much sugar, you will have decay in your teeth or diabetes. So whatever you put in your body, whether it's a drug or food, will have wanted and unwanted adverse effects. So there are adverse effects. And I find it almost reassuring, because the fact that there is an adverse event means the drug is doing something to your body. Otherwise, it's just a placebo. However, you have to be aware of these adverse events. And the older the drugs, the more follow-up we have, and the better we know the unwanted, the adverse events. When I started med school, we were not really aware of the adverse events. Now we know them, and we have learned how to control them. So you have to be aware of the adverse events so that you can give the patient an adapted prescription. For instance, if you give a big dose of any therapy to a patient, the patient will not feel well, and there will be many adverse events. So mostly when we introduce a new treatment, we give a small dose and we increase the dose progressively. I mean, it's our duty as doctors to check with you that the adverse events do not appear. We cannot simply say, oh, by the way, I wanted to tell you that I am spending a lot of money, and my bank balance is close to zero. No, you have to take the time to talk to the doctor, and the doctor needs to talk to the patient, and the patient needs to ask the doctor about the adverse events. You don't sell your house overnight. You decide to do something. For instance, you go to the tobacconist and you buy a lottery ticket, or you eat more chocolate than you used to. I mean, when you see something like that, you talk to your doctor, and maybe your doctor will decrease the dose or maybe switch to a different medication. In Parkinson's disease, we have several medications available to treat the symptoms. And you said it's not new, and that's what I find interesting. It is not new, as you just said. For a long time, doctors did not ask questions because they were not familiar enough with the adverse events. And there are hyperdopaminergic behaviors And sometimes the patients themselves were ashamed and did not want to talk to the doctor and say, I'm spending my family's money. I gamble in the casino, or they had behavioral and impulsive disorders that they were ashamed of. And the research was so limited that we did not really know the adverse events. Now that we are familiar with the adverse events, now that the patients play an active role in their treatment and the doctors are much more informed, they ask the right questions immediately, we see that there are less adverse events. Now, if you start a protocol to look into more specifically Parkinson disease patients with behavioral disorders and impulsive disorders, you have to wait for a while before you have a sufficient number of people with real issues because more people are being managed better. The therapy is more adjusted, and we see less serious adverse events. Obviously, for research purposes, sometimes it's not good enough because we have less subjects with bad behavioral issues, but at least it's a good sign because it means that our research is working. The longer it takes, the better in a way. The longer it takes to have enough people with serious adverse events, the better. It shows there was an evolution. I'll take a question online. We're going back. As you understand that we move from one topic to another, so we'll go back to the organoids. There is one question here. Why use organoids instead of human tissues? Not enough donors? No. I mean, obviously, it's not simple to obtain human tissue. And even if we have access to human tissue, it's extremely precious, costly. Could you tell us what kind of tissues you're referring to? Well, usually we have access to post-mortem tissues, but we need to make sure that we have enough tissue harvested exactly in the same area. We also have to have control tissues, but maybe control tissues coming from a patient who has a different disease, not Parkinson, but a different one. And that means the control tissues are not healthy. And, the tissues are very precious, they're very valuable. And we use postmortem tissues to validate an assumption once we already have conducted the research. So organoids are helpful because they give us a possibility to work on human cells, but in a very controlled environment. In the experiments I showed you, we have organoids derived from control cells, and the cells where we prevented Parkinson's from expressing them are the same. The only difference is that Parking does not express itself. So we can compare the two in a very strict way. That allows us to have more control, and it allows us to have even more tissues available. Thank you. We will now take a question from somebody in the back of the room. I would like to go back to something practical. A patient being followed by a community neurologist, not in the hospital, and who for the first time says, well, when the doctor talks about addiction and compulsive behavior, the doctor will make appointments every 6 months, but the patient will be ashamed, not will be uncomfortable, and will not want to talk about it. And the patient will be afraid that the medication is being removed, and he needs the medication and would rather not say anything about the compulsive behavior. So what about the pump? When exactly do we start thinking about the pump? When do we start saying, okay, if the medication is an issue, could we move to a pump? Our pumps may be not well known enough, and how is it going to work for people who have issues with their medication? Well, when adverse events appear, the first idea is not necessarily to switch to the pump, but the message I really want you to get across, and I want you to disseminate the idea around you, is that there are many different molecules available for symptomatic treatments. And there are two new pumps currently available. They came on the market in 2024. But for oral medication, if behavioral disorders appear, we decrease the agonists and we increase the L-DOPA. We never really stop the therapy overnight in the patient, and that could be bad. I mean, that there is a big threat with major stiffness if you stop the treatment overnight. So never, ever, never discontinue the treatment overnight. Talk to your doctor, and if you want to discontinue a treatment or decrease the treatment, do it with the doctor. That's why today we are mentioning the symptoms so that everybody remembers to talk to the doctor. There's no shame. I mean, symptoms are an adverse event, and you really have to talk with the doctor. The doctor could be your GP or your neurologist or someone else, the hospital doctor. Maybe you can talk to your GP and say, could you please contact my neurologist? I don't know what to do. And that's one thing. And the second thing is that you don't necessarily switch immediately to pumps. Switching to pumps is something that requires a joint agreement between the neurologist and the hospital neurologist, usually between the community neurologist and the expert center. We assess the possibility to switch to pumps, and maybe the patients will also talk to specialized nurses. We now have a new figure, that of specialized nurses, and they play an active role and they are very helpful because they're close to the patients. Okay, I'll take one more question online for researchers we have here. It's a broader issue. Are research topics shared with other countries in Europe, in the United States, or in Canada? Is there any international collaboration? What's the role played by international collaboration in current research? Well, maybe 100%. In research, we never work alone. We work in collaboration. We have different approaches depending on the country. And we can share our results. We can share our results and research. Most research topics are collaborative. Even in France, the National Agency for Research funds collaborative research. We're never or rarely alone to carry out research. We would never really achieve anything. We would go around in circles on the same ideas. But we do have cultural specificities. And for instance, if the French were the first to work on deep brain simulation targeting subthalamic nuclei, generally speaking, the French clinical teams for other applications, other indications than Parkinson's disease, for instance, obsessive compulsive disorders. The French teams are defending the subthalamic target, whereas the Americans will give precedence to the anterior arm of the internal capsula. And sometimes they say it's the commons, but really that's the area they target. So there are cultural differences, but whatever, we are working together. It is collaborative research because that's what research is all about. We want to work to improve knowledge. So we help each other. And even sometimes, although we choose different targets and different strategies, we discuss them together. I mean, that's why we organize conferences and we share our results, we compare our results, and that will help us come up with a strategy which will be the most useful or the most efficient one for our patients after we have each tested different things in our respective countries. But sooner or later, we will converge and there will be publications in international publications. There will be papers published in international publications. There will be congresses. And we may sometimes decide to organize joint research. And that's also a way for us to find the funding, because obviously it's very difficult today to obtain the funding if you're on your own. Well, on this subject, I really like to say that compared with when I was doing research myself, there is less competition. Okay, well, there is still some competition, but we're not fighting, working on our own and hiding our results because we want to keep the funding for ourselves and we don't want to share. I mean, it's still there, but I think there is now a trend with bigger sources of funding, international consortia, and it means that we have to join forces and bring together our knowledge. For instance, the ASAP project, the Google co-founder who has Parkinson's disease cases in his family, and he's giving billions of dollars worth of funding to research. So we're talking about collaborative research. It's not one researcher or one country. It's several countries, several researchers joining forces and sharing their expertise. And research has moved on.
Alors, moi, je vais me porter en faux par rapport à ça, parce que alors, il y a des programmes spécifiques où justement ils sont obligés de dire il faut collaborer, sinon vous n'aurez pas l'argent. Donc évidemment, là-dessus, on est tous copains et on va tous
We're all
postuler
friends,
à faire des
we're all going
consortiums
to
et à
postulate
travailler
and
ensemble.
form consortiums
Mais
and work
il faut quand
together.
même prendre
That's all well
conscience
and good, but you have
qu'actuellement,
to
le
be
deuxième
aware
pays qui
that
finance le
we're
moins
in
la
countries that
recherche.
finance
Et donc,
research the
quand il n'y a pas
less,
d'argent,
the
il y a
least. And when there's
compétition,
no money,
parce
there's
qu'il y en a pas pour
competition
tout le monde.
because
Et en
there's not
plus, au
enough for
niveau
everybody.
européen, on met en
And on the
avant
European level,
des programmes
we're
qui sont
ahead
hyper
of
élitistes,
programs that
qui
are
s'appellent
very
European
elite,
Research
such as the
Council,
European Research
ERC,
Council,
et c'est des programmes
ERC.
qui vont
And
donner
these are
environ
programs
2
that are going to be giving money
2
to one
millions
person, 2
400 ans
million
de
for
recherche
4 or 5 years of
et rien
research,
pour les autres.
and nothing for
Donc,
anybody else.
c'est
So
extrêmement, on est
it's
dans la culture de
we're
la
in
rareté des fonds.
a
Donc,
culture
si on
of,
n'a pas, bah, ça
the
va pas pour
scarcity
tout
of
le monde,
funds.
c'est pas réparti de façon
It's not
équitable. On était
broken
dans cette
down
période.
equitably.
Et du coup,
That's the
c'est quand
period
même
we're in,
pas hyper confortable.
and it's not
Alors,
that comfortable.
heureusement qu'il y a des
So
programmes comme le
thankfully, there
système
are
ANR,
programs,
justement,
the
des
ENR.
programmes qui sont
There's a lot of
collaboratifs
programs
plus
that are
par
collaborative,
équipe.
more
Mais
than
c'est
just
normal.
single teams.
Enfin, la situation est très
But the
compliquée.
situation is complicated.
Faut pas imaginer que d'un seul coup, on est arrivé au
We're,
pays des lapins roses et où on s'aime tous et il n'y
I
a pas de
mean,
compétition.
this is not mutual perfect love in the mutual world in a wonderful world. I think it's better. I'm not saying it's resolved. Thank goodness that France Parkinson has financed a lot. Let's take a question from the floor over here.
Bonjour, merci pour les présentations. J'avais une
Thank you for the
question.
presentations.
Vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me?
Sur les aspects mitochondrial. Donc, si j'ai
About
compris,
mitochondrial
vous aimeriez faire
aspects,
le lien entre
you want to draw the parallel
le stress
between stress
et finalement les déficiences sur les neurones dopaminergiques. Est-ce que vous
and
avez regardé si
dopaminergic.
en faisant des stress aigus,
If
on
you
diminuait
have
le stress chronique et on arrivait
if you reduce significantly
ralentir
uh, chronic stress, can you reduce
cette
some of the
dopaminergie
symptoms,
ou alors
or does it have an
en
effect
diminuant le seuil de stress chronique ou si
if
le
you
stress chronique
diminish
est aussi
that?
détrimental ou pas?
Alors, c'est une super question.
That's a
Euh,
great question.
et en fait, c'est une partie du projet
This
justement
is
de
part of the
Christiane que j'ai
project
pas voulu expliquer
of
ici parce
Christian
qu'il
that
fallait
I
un peu
didn't want to
spécifier les
explain because
notions
we would
de
have to
stress
add the
chronique,
whole
stress
notion
aigu, etc.
of
Donc, le
chronic
stress aigu, ça
stress.
va
And
être un stress ponctuel, assez
so
fort,
is it a
et
one-off
par rapport
stress,
avec
a
un
strong
stress
one-off stress,
chronique
or a
comme ce
chronic
que je vous ai
stress,
montré, c'est-à-dire qu'on va
such as what
stresser
I
les
showed you?
cellules
We're
tout
going to be
doucement, mais
stressing the cells
régulièrement
just a little
pendant
bit,
une
but
période.
regularly for a
Donc,
long period. So
nous sommes en train de le faire.
we
Ce que
are
nous sommes en
currently
train de
doing
regarder,
that.
c'est
What we're looking at
est-ce que les réponses
is are the
à
answers
un stress aigu sont
to
différentes
punctual
de celles
stress
à un stress
different
chronique?
than a chronic stress?
Oui,
What are the
il y a des
differences?
trucs, c'est un peu différent,
So
il faut
that's the first
s'entendre,
thing.
mais surtout, en fait, ce qui nous
They are a
intéresse
bit
dans le cadre
different,
de la maladie
which
de
is what we're
Parkinson, où on
expecting.
pense
But
que
in the
les
case of
cellules sont
Parkinson's
autostressées
disease,
de
when you think that
base,
the cells are basically stressed
donc
already,
ce qui équivaudrait à un stress chronique.
so that
Est-ce
would
que les
be a
cellules
chronic
qui ont
stress.
subi
So
un
the
stress
cells
chronique
that had a
répondent
chronic stress, do they
moins bien
respond
ou
not as
mieux
well
à un
or
stress aigu
better
si on
to
compare à des cellules qui ont juste
a
subi un stress
one-off
chronique?
stress?
Je sais pas si c'est clair. Et en gros, on essaye de voir si
So
c'est des
basically,
cellules
we're
qui ont
trying to
été
see
stressées
if
pendant
cells that have been stressed for
longtemps
a
ou
long
même un tout petit peu,
period,
s'ils
even
sont
just a
capables,
bit for a long period, if
lorsqu'elles
they're
sont
able,
stressées
when they are
fortement d'un
subject
coup de
to a
façon
very strong
importante,
stress,
de
all of a
mettre en
sudden,
place des
um,
réponses de protection
do we
aussi
need
bien
protective
que
responses
en temps normal. Donc, je ne
as
peux
in
pas vous
normal
répondre parce que nous
times?
sommes en train de
I
le faire.
can't answer you because that's what we're studying.
Merci.
Thank you.
On va reprendre une question
I guess we'll take a question
devant.
from the front here.
Bonjour, donc moi c'est une
Hi.
question d'une néophyte.
I have a
Je suis
question from a
étudiante
neophyte.
à la maladie de Parkinson
I'm a daughter of a patient. I'd like to know, it goes back to the idea of funding. You summarized in 15 minutes years of research. And we've understood that we'll not see the effects right away for patients. For each of you, what are the next steps of your research? And we say the next steps, not really technical. I mean, your funding for what is to follow. And for France Parkinson, are we financing lots of research, or are we going to actually help research that's already started? I think the question is for me. No, it's for everybody, really. Just to say the choices of projects, we have a call for projects, either social or medical. We receive a lot of projects. I think we finance a lot of fundamental and preclinical research, preclinical research. We'd love to finance all of those subjects. We don't have an envelope that would allow us to do that. And we have a scientific committee of experts doing fundamental research, which represent just about all of the skills available in France, that will be choosing to select the projects on the basis of their scientific value, the level of innovation, and feasibility as well. So we classify these in order, and we try to hand out projects as the envelope is started. We had up to 2 million last year for research projects, which is a lot. But it's true that for the moment, we have projects, but we don't necessarily have an automatic continuity of financing. We have that in mind. If a project has interesting results and promising results, do we then grant additional money for a year more so that they can move forward and get more results so it can be more transitional? So we've had this in mind for a while, and we have to implement that, but we're obviously thinking about this a great deal. If I could add something, personally, we're all working on fundamental research, maybe a bit more clinical for my colleague, or we're pretty far away from medication that's going to be used to treat people. And public research doesn't have the resources it costs a lot of money to bring medication to the market. In the lab, I had a student on a thesis who worked with me, who wrote a few articles, and who was able to get a therapeutic in case of chronic pain outside of Parkinson's, and we derive value. We got it patented, and a researcher put together a startup whose objective was to get private funds, private investors, in order to develop the medication. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. You can't develop, in a public context, a new medication. We need private funds. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalistic world. So there are systems and processes that are like that require many more resources than. I wanted to respond about the continuation of my project, which for some it might seem pretty far off when you say we're working on something like in the social context. We still see a potential involvement, and possible side effects to detect. And since sociability was never studied in Parkinson's patients, how are they affected by deep cerebral stimulation? There's been no study on that. So it's not necessarily me that's going to be setting up the study with clinicians. But the fact that we are showing that in animals, and that's what's great in our research community, clinicians also look at what we're doing on animals. At least some of them do. And they're going to be curious to question their patients and look at this. And we can see in a few years, hopefully, development of research that could be more interested in sociability in Parkinson's. And how is that affected or not by stimulation? I'd like to get back to the aspect cited of valuation. deriving value for startups. Sometimes we receive emails saying it's scandalous. Startups are created because they want to make money. You have to realize that it's a change in the area of research. Industrials were doing research and preclinical right to development. They're financing the whole thing, and it costs a lot of money. With a lot of medication that are lost, that fall by the wayside. And these industrials, in the last decades, they've just withdrawn from fundamental research. So they depend on academic or financing. So there's this kind of no man's land between the preclinical results and the industrial who has to be able to put that on the market. And that can only be handled by startups. The existence of biotech startups is indispensable to get from that fundamental research over to actual application in the clinic. And unfortunately, all the startups that have brilliant ideas don't always get the money. You have to interest the right people. You have to get the financiers. And I think this is a phase that today is indispensable to research. It really makes that transition feasible from fundamental preclinical to more applied and clinical that would be taken over by industrials and who can invest millions and billions to bring it to the market. So I think you have to bear those issues in mind. I think we've reached the end of our time. We can continue 5 or 10 minutes if there's still questions. I think there's one question here. You've been sitting down for a couple of hours. But yes, sir. I'd like to know how much is affected to research. And the park is to cure the disease. What share of the amount? And I'd like to know where AI stands in research on Parkinson's. And the researcher in Tours, in France, who was proposing a medication for diabetics that stopped degeneration.
Alors, donc, il y avait deux questions.
There were two questions. And I think we'll let you go. About the two questions. The first question was, if you're talking about preclinical or clinical, in actual trials, every year there's an article that's published on the pipeline of studies that are being done with the type of approach, symptomatic or whatever, neuroprotection and various mechanisms that are targeted by a researcher who does the review every year of that pipelines. Globally, it's like 50-50, maybe 60-40. There's an effort in both areas, in both types of approach. In symptoms, there's also people that are interested in motor symptoms or non-motor symptoms. Now, for the anti-diabetic medication, you're talking about lexinitide? There are two anyway. Lexinitide. So this is the study that we participated in.
Moi-même, je veux qu'on arrête.
I think we have to stop. There's a study in Great Britain with a molecule that was positive in phase 2 and negative in the following phase. And in France, there's a study in the previous that was positive, and the new phase isn't done yet. So the mystery is all still very much there. You can't actually, if you're not diabetic with Parkinson's, you can't be prescribed that medication because the efficacy and the safety profile has not yet been confirmed for use with diabetics. So you'd have to take it in the framework of a clinical research that protects you and protects them. Well, you might have to choose a specific molecule. And you have that in France and in Great Britain, but it's not yet confirmed. Thank you so much. We're going to have to stop at this point. Thanks for everything. I'd like to thank a few people, so don't leave right this second. First of all, I'd like to really thank our speakers for coming today. They're not all from Paris. Some are from Marseille, Bordeaux. So thanks for having to simplify research for people and understanding. I'd like to thank the Foundation for Research Cerveau that we've been working with for many years and who also shares with us the choice of projects. And also, you have right. Let's applaud, yes, and Dim Sibrin, who supports us for this day. And I'd like to thank all of the France Parkinson team who are present today. All of the staff are here, and our committee. Without them, this day would not have been possible, so thanks for everything that they did. I'd like to thank our committee because France Parkinson, our staff in Paris, but these are there are 900 volunteers in France that help us to do actions locally throughout the whole territory. This is really the live force of France Parkinson. So thanks to our committees in France, and some are listening to us, and I think they really are worthy of your applause. Our events would not be possible without the team that helps us, called Pointe Noire, who've been helping us for 4 years now. And as I say, each time working with them is working without stress, because even when there's problems, there's no problem. They always have a solution. You don't see them, but they're there, and I'm so thankful for them. It's always a pleasure to work with them. It's important. And I would like to thank all of our members and donors. Without them, France Parkinson would not be there, and we would not finance research. So if I had to present research, it's thanks to our donors. We hope that we'll all be unemployed soon, that we'll have found final solutions for Parkinson's, but awaiting that moment, we'd like to thank donors who will let us help research move forward. So thanks to our donors. Before we close, we're going to have some water and some biscuits. I think it's going to be a good time to stand up and get some physical activity. So we'll give you a glass. It's the 40 years of last year. It's a gift. You can keep the glass, take it home with you. Think of us next time. You might be some cookies. And there's a discovery area. If you haven't seen it before, go there now. The young researchers are there to respond to the questions you have. Some of them have subjects that we spoke about today. So take advantage of the space is open. Come and have a look and see you next year. Thank you so much.